What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Geek Pantheon. I am Eric, and today I have another Steal This for Your Game video, which is one of my favorite videos to do. I love finding mechanics in other systems and saying, hey, this would work really well in a D&D game with a little bit of massaging. And I have another one for you for social encounters, specifically structured social encounters. You could use this system kind of long form over just general interactions with NPCs, but I think this shines really well in like a negotiation or a party setting where there's a set amount of time that the party has to like have a social interaction with a person or a group of people. And that's really how this system was built. And those of you that play Pathfinder 2nd Edition will, of course, know that I'm talking about the influence system from Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I was fortunate enough to be a backer for the Kingmaker Anniversary Edition because I really like that adventure path. I like it in concept and with all the 5e rules that we're going to get attached with it. I got the materials, and so I've been going through them. And the companion guide is a book that I'm just going to have to do a whole separate video on for all the things that you can steal from that and utilize. But the point being, I noticed the influence on some of the NPC stat blocks, influence markers. And I've never played Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I am vaguely aware of the rules. I did beta testing way back when they released the beta rules and ran that one shot. But I've never gone too deep into the rules. And so it sent me down this rabbit hole of the influence subsystem for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So for those of you unfamiliar, I'm going to describe two different scenarios at the table, one using the current D&D rules and the other one using the Pathfinder 2nd Edition rules. So as it stands right now, if you just rules as written, any homebrews that you do at your table, notwithstanding, rules as written, generally speaking, if you have the party that wants to sit down with an influential figure in the city and convince them to provide protection to a certain group, let's just say, and the party is sitting down trying to get that accomplished. You might go back and forth with some role play, some actual negotiation of like, we want you to help this. Well, this is why that would be a problem. Well, what if we could mitigate some of those concerns by doing X? Well, then what would happen with Y? And you go back and forth, so on and so forth. Then inevitably the DM asks, okay, go ahead and make a persuasion roll. And then you fail. And the DM basically says their piece, comes up with the way where it didn't work out, or you could do an intimidation roll, whatever roll. It comes down to a single roll. And that is one of the biggest complaints that I hear about D&D 5th edition is social encounters come down to a single roll, which is not how actual interactions with people happen. One misstep in a conversation isn't going to shut the whole thing down. People have slip of the tongue, trip over their words, things like that, failed checks, but can recover and still achieve their goals. So with the Pathfinder influence system, what it would look like is you and your party arrive for the negotiations and you see the other party sitting over there talking with some of their advisors, and you take a moment to observe them, size them up, get a sense of what's important to them, maybe overhear what they're talking about in the moment, look around the room, see if you're in their office, what they have pictures of, indicating what's important to them, what they care about. And then you sit down at the table and you make a check, or you do a little bit of role play and then make a check. But it does not have to be a social skill. It does not have to be intimidation. It does not have to be persuasion. It does not have to be deception. Let's say that you saw a picture on the wall of them holding a giant fish, like posing with it, and you make a nature check to talk shop about fish. Oh, I see you caught that type of fish, the blue marlin, let's say. You caught a blue marlin. Those things are huge. Where were you when you got that? That is absolutely how real life conversations go, is like showing a shared interest and a shared understanding of something is going to instantly develop a rapport with the person, because then the person's like, oh yeah. And they'll tell the story about how they got that. And you know what? Good. Went up a little bit. And then maybe you also see a picture of their kids. And so you talk about, with things the way they're going in the city right now, I think we really need to look out for for the younger kids out there. And like, I think that this city, if things continue going the way they're going, it's going to not be a safe place for them anymore. And really, you know, appealing to their sense of paternal instinct, which would perhaps be a persuasion check or an intimidation check if you're getting really gruff about it. But the DC is affected because you're appealing to this weakness of theirs, of their kids, and so on and so forth, representing about 15 minutes of discussion and time. That's malleable up to the DM, to the point where 4, 5, 6 rounds have gone by, and maybe other party members on their turn are observing, seeing their mannerisms, figuring out like patterns of speech and what is also important to them, how to appeal to them. And so then at the end, you do a tally. Well, you've been tallying the whole time to see where your influence score ended up, and that affects the end result, whether or not you have 2 influence points, 5 influence points, 12 influence points, and you get greater and greater rewards and a greater sense of understanding and connection with this person based on that. One of those systems sounds like a whole heck of a lot of fun, and the other one sounds like the way we currently do it. And I'm not knocking the single roll, because there are times where it makes sense if you're just asking somebody like, hey, can you do me this quick favor, do a quick and dirty roll and move on. But for the negotiations, the back and forth, that kind of thing, I think this is a much, much, much better way to do it. So I'm going to get into the system and how it works and how it is. It's extremely adaptable to D&D 5th edition, extremely adaptable. And I think that you should use it for your social encounters. So basically, you would create an influence NPC stat block. So for any NPC that is going to be at this negotiation, you're going to create it. I'm going to put up an example right here. So this is the example given in the Pathfinder 2nd edition Game Mastery Guide, where we are looking at Daphne Moleweather. And the situation that they give for this example is they are a crotchety old landlord. You're trying to convince them to not evict a theater troupe that's living in a dilapidated building that he owns. So but he's a very busy guy. You got 3 rounds to do it. 45-minute meeting. Each round's 15 minutes. Go. So if you look, we have the name, and then perception and will. Those are just good general stats for if you have to make stuff up on the fly. Their base will. This would be obviously translating to D&D. Something like their wisdom potentially would be what you're looking at, or their like their wisdom saving throw, something along those lines would be where you're kind of basing your DC off of. Or you could do a different stat, just whatever makes sense, in my opinion. And then the discovery skills. So these are the skills that the player characters can use when they take the discovery action to learn more about the character. So observing them, like observing their environment, what's important to them. So in Danfy's case, DC 13 Mercantile Lore, DC 18 Perception, and DC 16 Society. So what this means is that if a player character wants to take the discovery action, Perception is always a baseline. So just perceiving them in their environment is always an option. And you got the DC 18 to learn about them. But additionally, because they are a merchant, because they are a landlord, mercantile lore makes sense. And obviously these skills are not going to translate 1-to-1. But that would be a much easier DC 13 to observe something about them. And then DC 16 Society. So obviously skills like investigation and insight would also in the D&D sphere come into realm here. So if it's somebody who's very closely guarded, like an old crotchety landlord, I imagine would keep kind of a stone face. So maybe have insight be a slightly more difficult check than the perception, because it's easier to glean things about this person by observing their environment as opposed to their demeanor. And same with investigation. Maybe if they have a really messy office because he's a very busy guy, he doesn't have time to clean. And so investigation would be an easier check because he's going to have stuff laying out. And so it's easier to kind of look around and poke and prod with your eyes. And it may be that you want to just completely do away with perception and have investigation be what you use as the primary skill for discovery. That can make sense. I think perception still works because you're still perceiving the area around you and things like that. You're not like poking and prodding and digging into things, but I think that could still be a skill that plays into, but I would have perception still be the baseline. And then we don't have a society skill in D&D 5th edition, but maybe history could work well. Or if you have somebody that's really religion, obviously to notice religious iconography around, things like that. But the important thing is these are when you're taking the discover skill. What happens when you take the discover skill? Pathfinder has a like tiered success system where critical success is if you beat the DC by a huge amount as opposed to only on a natural 20. So if you wanted to do that and say if you beat the DC by 10 or more, you get a critical success, or if you just want to keep it on a nat 20, but essentially with the discovery action. So on a critical success, you get to pick two options from the list of success that you get to pick from. So when you succeed on the check, you either roll or you either learn the influence skill with the lowest DC. And if you've already learned some, you move your way up. You learn a weakness of the NPC, a personal bias of the NPC, or a resistance of the NPC. So these are all things that are on the NPC stat block. So looking at the NPC stat block, things that you can learn if you successfully roll in one of these discovery skills, influence skills, DC 16 accounting lore, and it gives in parentheticals like noting how the theater could be made profitable, DC 16 crafting, offering to repair the building, DC 20 intimidation, 20 performance, 22 diplomacy, or 24 deception. So the other thing is you always keep your social skills in there. You always keep intimidation, persuasion, diplomacy, and deception as options. It's just that some people are going to be more or less receptive to that. But then additionally, talking skills. I mean, I just think back to like my dad, huge gearhead, loved working on cars when I was growing up. He would bring home cars just to fix them up. No intention of keeping them. He would just work on the engine. And if he was out in the driveway working on a car and somebody like one of our neighbors walked up and just immediately started talking shop, talking cars, talking engines, talking about what he's working on, it doesn't matter if that person is the most socially awkward person in the world. They could have a -8 charisma modifier and they will be one of my dad's new best friends because they understand what he cares about. And so that is not really reflective in D&D 5th edition right now, where you can have an instant social connection with somebody outside of social skills. And I love that for the influence system where, it obviously gives parentheses for like how these things can apply, but you can also just have it be if you're talking to a ranger and trying to get them to agree to do a favor for you or join you on a mission or whatever, and you just make a nature check to talk nature, or a survival check to just talk survival skills, and you instantly have that connection. I think of The Office, for those who watch that, where Dwight made his best friend because he overheard him asking for a pair of shoes that would increase his speed but leave no tracks. And it's like, that's the person I want to be friends with. It wasn't like a good persuasion roll. It was, hey, we care about this thing. So that's one of the things that drew into the system is the capacity to make social connections with any skill. And certain party members are going to have a stronger connection with like-minded NPCs. And that makes a lot of sense. And then going into the resistances, weaknesses. So resistance, this particular character thinks in practical terms with little patience for good-for-nothings. So any direct appeals to sympathy with no other contingencies attached, increase the DC of whatever skill it is by 2. Weaknesses: used to visit the theater, often as a small child, and making a performance check, performing one of his favorite old songs or plays, reduces that performance DC by 2. So normally performance DC is 20, so you can get that down to 18 if you're doing something that he cares about. So maybe you're making the perception check and you learn this weakness by seeing, there's a single poster of a show on the wall of his office. That's the one show that he loves. And so you know a monologue from it, or you know something for a song from it. And so you can perform that at a reduced DC, which I really like. And then the personal biases are just kind of baked into the background, his appearance, his personality, and then the penalty isn't something that you can really discover. It's just there. If you sermonize or waste his time, then he reduces the meeting time from 2 to 3 rounds. So that is all the things you can learn to discover. And then with the influence action, basically you can make one of the influence skill checks with the appropriate DC. Critical success, you gain 2 influence points. Success, you gain 1. Failure, you gain no. Critical failure, you lose 1. And so that's the only aspect of this where I would probably change the language to say, if you beat the DC by 10 or more, if you beat the DC, if you fail to meet the DC, if you fail to meet the DC by 10 or more, just because only having the ability to lose influence points on a natural 1 is, it's less balanced, I would say. So I would adjust that to where it's easier to like misstep, say the wrong thing, and backtrack. So those are the 2 skills. It's not like we're building a whole robust, like combat-esque social structure. It is you either try to learn more about the person, and here are the list of skills you can do, or you try to influence the person, here are the list of skills you can do. And you can try different skills. It's just up to the GM to make a DC on the fly, which we do that a lot. So I really enjoy this system. I think that it offers so much like robustness in terms of social interactions, especially in this structured encounter, because then on the NPC stat block, you also see the influence levels. So if you end the encounter with influence 4, then Mr. Mulweather gives the troop 1 week to get him back his rent with interest before evicting them. So, okay, fine. I'm not going to evict them. They have a week. And now the party has a week to try and solve the problem. They've got something. Influence 6, Mr. Mulweather gives the troop a month to get him back his rent before evicting them. No interest. Just get me rent. And then influence 8, Mr. Mulweather allows the troop to stay, reducing their rent and forgiving half their debts. So if you just nail it out of the park. And so this is a structured thing, and that makes it easier for the DM to know, okay, if you hit these milestones, this is what happens. And if you fail to meet the first milestone, you failed the encounter. And it might even be fun to add like if they somehow manage to end up with negative influence, like I'm going to demolish the building, like I'm kicking them out and I'm tearing the theater down. So I like this, and this is what caught my eye when I was looking at the companions and the companion guide for Kingmaker. Is when you're first meeting them, they have these influence levels that as you're at the feast and you're talking to them, and you have multiple NPCs at the table, so different party members can be talking to different people and raising the influence with different PCs based on their personal preferences. So with this encounter with the landlord, you're kind of locked into, well, if I don't have any of these skills, I'm kind of locked out. But at this party setting, NPCs cover such a wide range of different skill sets and different interests that every party member is going to have proficiency in at least one skill to discover and influence an NPC at this table. And I love that. I love that in a social interaction, no party members feel left out or like they can't actively mechanically engage. Obviously, party members are always going to be welcome to feel free to role play. But this system allows them to role play and gain mechanical advantages through the role play and through the social interaction. Because a lot of times when you have somebody that has a really high charisma score, not all the time, but a lot of times, the other players will feel free to like role play and do stuff like that, but they're always going to hedge their bets to make sure they're not the one that's going to have to make the check, if that makes sense. They're always going to let the quote unquote face of the party be the one taking the lead on the negotiation, the discussion, whatever. so that they can make the check, and maybe their good role play will give advantage to the roll. Whereas with this, it would be such a great moment for like the face of the party to be like, okay, I'm going to take the lead on this. We got this. And everybody's like, okay. And they walk into this negotiation and it's a barbarian behind the table. And the party's barbarian is like, I got this. And they're just like sharing like tips on surviving out in the wild and raging, and like they're intimidating the crap out of each other going back and forth, but it's a very playful like game of one-upsmanship. And the face of the party is like, yeah, I don't know why I'm here. I'll just have fun. And that's not to say like that you're diminishing the role of the face of the party, but if you at session 0 introduce this system and tell them, okay, here's what we're going to do for social interactions. So you can invest in charisma, you can invest in these social skills, and you will always be viable regardless of the type of individual you're discussing. The DC just might be higher, like with the landlord, where, you know, somebody that knows accounting, lore, or crafting is going to have an easier time, but the face of the party is always going to be able to step in and make effective checks. But people will feel free to invest. If somebody still wants to have the ability to role play and do social encounters, they're going to feel less encumbered to focus on that and be like, well, I can focus on this and this and this, and there's a good chance that I will still come across people that like history and arcana in a fantasy setting. 80% of NPC influence stat box are probably going to have that, because history and arcana are such important things with like medieval-esque fantasy settings or religion. Like these knowledge skills become social skills because you can share information and show, hey, I'm knowledgeable about this thing too. We care about the same thing. Let's work together. I love it. I love it so much. So let me know what you think down below about this concept, about this system. I just scratched the surface of it because I don't want to it's a proprietary thing of Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So if you want more details, go check out the Game Mastery Guide for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, because all the rules are in there. And I think there's SRDs online to where you can also go and check them out there. But let me know what you think of the system down below. Do you think social encounters work perfectly fine in D&D currently? Or do you think that a system like this could go a long way towards making them more dynamic and more engaging? I obviously know how I feel. So thank you all so much for watching. I've been Eric, and I will see you next time.